Who has the quickest twitch? Whose hips are the most oily? Who has the quickest long snap? Hand sizes, wingspans. Oh, no one knows hand sizes and wingspans better than Courtney, our draft scout.
It is indeed that time. It has been a little while because we've been so focused on free agency, but Courtney, our draft scout, Courtney Cronin, has taken a break, and for this segment, it will be purely Courtney, our draft scout. Courtney, Ms. Draft Scout, I should say.
Yes.
Are you prepared for this?
I am, and I think that the Pro Football Prospectus from 2008 that's currently sitting to my right, that I actually read all 900 pages of this thing this morning in preparation for this, I feel good about this. You know, coronavirus can take away my sanity. It can take away my social life. It can take away the normalcy that I have on an everyday basis. But you know what it cannot take away? It cannot take away my draft scouting.
That's right.
Let's
no,
go.
It can't. You're totally right about that. And people digging up old, awesome football memorabilia, feel free to tweet at us with it because
it's my favorite.
It's awesome.
Well, I had to, so just to recap, so I came back to Illinois. We're under shelter in place here. And I came back because that's where my family is, and it's time for me to be the adult and pull my weight a little bit. But I knew that I would be here indefinitely, which is why I'm doing the show from here. And I also had to set up in the little office/computer room a setup for video shoots. I had to do one yesterday for free agency. I have another one coming up in the coming weeks. I know I'm like Skyping a few college classes that are doing online remote stuff. And I was just like, well, I shouldn't be doing it from my bedroom where there's like a Dave Matthews Band poster right over my bed. So I'm like, well, let's do something in the basement. And I have a little bookshelf. I'm looking at it to my left right now, and it's actually turned out really nice. Like, I found some awesome sports memorabilia. My grandfather's like literal leather helmet.
Oh, wow.
Like how these guys wore this stuff. Because my grandfather went on scholarship to DePaul University in Greencastle, Indiana, and played football there. And I just, I'm looking at that. There's so much good sports junk in this basement. Madden 96 is over there. I don't even have Sega anymore, but if someone does and I would let me buy it off them, I have time, so please DM me.
I have it for Super, and it's a great game.
I'm very
96
excited.
Is fantastic.
I'm excited to get to play with all of my random sports junk and Pro Football Prospectus from 08. I found this morning and I tweeted about it.
What's the funniest thing that you found in that?
Well, the
cover, the most old takes exposed or whatever.
The cover itself, because I tweeted a picture of it. Tavares Jackson stands between the Vikings and the Super Bowl. Well, I don't think it was all of his fault.
I mean, sort of right, but ironically speaking, I mean, because getting rid of him and getting Brett Favre almost took them to the Super Bowl. They didn't know that then.
AJ Hawk, no Favre, no problem. That's on the front of my
AJ Hawk.
On my on the thing. I wish I could open it up and remember where I looked at something about Tom Brady where it was talking about what his ceiling was in 2008, and this thing is just a gem. And I tweeted about this, and Bill Barnwell, because I called it sports junk because it's just random stuff that hasn't been thrown away. And he's like, well, I wrote that sports junk, which made me laugh because why do I still have this? I found a draft guide from 2010. It was before like the internet existed. Allegedly.
Do you have it? Do you have it sitting right there?
No, I actually threw it away.
Oh my gosh, what?
Sam Bradford though was the first one that I pulled up. That was I opened it up. I was like, man, I'm not going to say whose draft guide it was because I don't want to insult anybody, but I pulled it up. I'm like, wow, this is detailed. I could absolutely get this on Google right now. But it was, they had a pretty good breakdown. It was like 120 pages.
I am really disappointed that you got rid of a draft guide for 2010. That would have been hilarious to look through.
I think the Pro Football Prospectus from 2008 is this is enough reading for me for the next like 6 months.
We will get your every other day reports on what happened in 2008 or what they thought was going to happen in 2008. But let's get into what's going to happen in 2020. Why does 2008 suddenly feel really, really long ago?
Every time I talk about it, I'm like, oh, that was 4 years ago. No, Courtney, it's not 2012.
Even when I'm playing my old video games, I've been playing Madden 64, which is from the 97 season, And I'm just, playing along like, oh yeah, man, Chris Carter was amazing. Like, how old is Chris Carter now? Oh, 52 or something. Oh yeah, okay. How old am I again? That always happens when players' kids end up in the NFL draft, players that you watch growing
Yeah.
up. Like,
I
oh,
will
good.
say that one thing that kind of disappointed me throughout this whole sports junk process. We have a rack down here that had like CD-ROMs. Does anybody remember what those were
Oh
for
yeah.
putting in your
Compute
computer?
where you had computer games.
Yes, so Triple Play Baseball.
Oh, I had that
Sammy
one.
Sosa
Yeah.
on the cover of it. I
Mhm.
tried to put it in my MacBook earlier and the little slot, and it
It-
didn't work.
And it melted, and now you owe ESPN a computer.
Pretty much. Really disappointed about that. I honestly don't know what to do with those. Do I donate them? I mean,
To
you can't really.
who?
They were Goodwill. Like,
Kids who have computers from 1998.
I don't know. I'm just trying to get rid of it because it's also like, what is this stuff? Why is it still here?
Hospitals are like, we need more gowns, we need more masks. You're like, I have AAA baseball, 1998. That's not. You're
Oh,
not
man.
helping. All right, Courtney, our draft scout, play the intro again. We need to reset this.
Who has the quickest twitch? Whose hips are the most oily? Who has the quickest long snap? Hand sizes, wingspans. Oh, no one knows hand sizes and wingspans better than Courtney, our draft scout.
Mel Kiper, his 3.0 mock draft. When Mel drops a mock, things get exciting. So I'm just going to start out the top of this mock, Courtney, and we can discuss until, let's go. I'm going to read names off until something strikes you as unique or interesting, okay? So he has the Cincinnati Bengals taking Joe Burrow number 1, pretty much status quo there. Chase Young going to Washington, Jeff Okudah to Detroit, Isaiah Simmons to New York, Tua 5th overall to the Dolphins, which Tua tweeted a video of himself. Any of this interesting so far?
I mean, I think that Jeff Okudah going that high is probably the only one that I'm like, whoa, he has him all the way up at 3 because I think he certainly is a top 10 pick. Most times I've seen him within the 4 to 7 range, but 3 is the highest I've seen him, and that to me shows you just the run on cornerbacks that's going to happen is going to happen far later in the first round. I think it's going to go somewhere top 5. You'll see Okudah go, and then there'll be maybe like 1 or 2 from like 14 to 17, and then the bottom of the draft, bottom of that first round, is going to be heavy with quarterbacks.
Now, Mel does not include trades because when a mock,
too confusing.
And I'll just say this, when a mock has a bunch of trades, you're right. I just get like, wait, who, when are they drafting? What, how are they doing that? So Tua going 5th to the Dolphins, it does seem reasonable for Washington to consider taking Tua and have him compete with Dwayne Haskins. I don't see why not, considering the importance of the position. So if you're the Dolphins, I think you are calling up Washington and saying, let's make sure we get this done and nobody else gets Tua except for us, because if he's ahead of his recovery, he was a number 2 overall draft pick this entire time. The only question was just about his medicals, but everything seemed to check out at the combine, and now he's back doing football things. I think Miami should have their eyes on trading up to number 2 to get him.
Yeah, and I feel like he ends up there either way. Because the buzz coming out of the combine, the buzz the last few weeks as the NFL world has kind of been, or at least the pre-draft process has kind of been on hold, is still that Miami has its eyes set on Tua, however it has to get them. So I agree with you. If they have to trade up to 2, if they really are feeling like Washington is a threat, because who knows what happens over the next few weeks. It's going to be interesting because they can't have these pre-draft visits, these top 30 visits where, prospects, information that gets out about prospects and who they visited with, how the visits went, the whole thing. Now that those don't exist, will that information be as readily available for teams to know what their respective 31 other teams are going to do and kind of be able to tap into that mindset? That's going to make it really intriguing.
Number 6, Justin Herbert going to the Los Angeles Chargers. What do we think of Justin Herbert and Jordan Love's draft stock? Because before coronavirus took over our lives, I remember Mel Kiper and Todd McShay screaming at each other, and yes, exactly, and making some sort of lucrative bet on which one of those two would go higher. If you're the Chargers, there is a good case for drafting a quarterback and sticking with Tyrod Taylor. And drafting a quarterback is always fun. So if you're talking about entertainment value going into a new stadium and such, then that makes a lot of sense. But I also can't figure out what the NFL really thinks of Herbert and Love, because they both have some pretty serious issues that would kind of make you back off. And sometimes this has happened in the past. Jimmy Clausen, the most notable that I can remember right off the top of my head, where it was, oh yeah, all of these quarterbacks are going in the top. This guy's going to be top 2 overall pick, and he ends up in the second round. Or even Teddy, 32nd overall, Lamar, 32nd overall. I think the same thing is going to happen with either Justin Herbert or Jordan Love or both.
So you think that there will only be how much would you be willing to hedge that only 2 were taken in the first round? That doesn't feel realistic to me.
No, I think more than that will be taken, but I do question whether there are 3 or 4 taken in the top 10.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're more likely to see the wide receiver run start earlier, the cornerback run potentially, the non-Jeff Okudah start earlier. I don't think that he's a top 10 quarterback, but, given the way that things played out for the Chargers in free agency, this may be the direction that they're leaning, which is why I think that this was released today, because we clearly know what the NFL world feels about everybody not named Tua or Joe Burrow, that they just don't really care to go all in on these quarterbacks, the rest of the crop. So, if you can get a value pick in the second round, that's probably where some teams are going to go and try to either stick with who they have, stick with who they got in free agency, make a trade here or there, and try to build out that way. That's why you're not seeing as much of a quarterback hype train, rather, at this time of year.
Yeah, I think if you're the Chargers, that it's a better play to get Cam Newton and see if Cam Newton can be what he used to be than it is to draft Justin Herbert, because I just don't think Herbert's going to be very good. And I could be extremely wrong, but after watching tape with Sage about, some of the weaknesses that he has, I don't think they translate to being a great NFL quarterback. And, you never know, because there have been lots of guys who you didn't think would be great who turned out to be really good, but I'm just not super sold on what he can be. I wouldn't be surprised if the Chargers are. So continuing down the list, Derek Brown to the Panthers at 7, I guess so. I mean, drafting a defensive tackle that high, the guy better be Warren freaking Sapp.
Yeah, exactly.
I could see someone doing it. I just don't get it if they do.
I could understand a defensive end there, but the defensive end class is not as strong, at least to make a case for any of those guys going in the top 10. Now, 15 and below, sure, but a defensive tackle at 7 when you were very much in the midst of a rebuild, draft for the future, get the best player possible at that point.
So I'm going to go sort of yada, yada, yada style here with this. Just naming some players that the Vikings might be interested in that are off the board in this case. Javon Kinlaw and Tristan Wirfs are taken after that at 8 and 9. Mekhi Becton at 10, and Jedrick Wills to the Jets. So he thinks that these offensive linemen are going to go high. Somebody that I've had in a few draft sims, CJ Henderson, Mel Kiper thinks is going really high, 12th at the Raiders. So then he starts off with the receivers. Also, Andrew Thomas goes off the board. Henry Ruggs goes to the Broncos. So a lot of the players that we have had show up in draft sims is dropping. He's not seeing as realistic. Now, I have to stop at number 20 because he has Antoine Winfield Jr. as the 20th overall pick. Wow, Mel Kiper really high on Antoine Winfield Jr.
Yeah, that was the one that really surprised me, just looking at it all across the board. I mean, the fact that Winfield went at 20 and that there were 5 receivers chosen before the Vikings got to 22 was a little surprising to me.
Oh, I had my mic off. Sorry. Yeah, definitely a surprise. I think he's more of a mid-second round pick because of the positional value. Safety is great, but he is a guy who can play in the nickel spot too. And I think we saw it from Tyrann Mathieu that if you can move around a lot, and not everyone is Tyrann Mathieu, but Winfield has the instincts and the athleticism that he proved at the combine to be able to do that. So that would be quite a win for the Gophers program to have a guy drafted that high if that were to happen. So let's get to 22. Denzel Mims, the receiver from Baylor. And I will tell you the first tweet that I got after I retweeted your article breaking down the 2 picks from the Vikings was these would be the worst picks they could make. And
I got a lot of the similar vibes about that.
But I don't necessarily agree with that. So he's got Denzel Mims at 22, and then at 25, AJ Epenesa from Epenesa.
You're right.
Epenesa, sorry. Okay.
From Iowa.
Let's hope that he's not the pick. Epenesa, right?
Yep.
So from Iowa, right? He's a beastly defensive end. So Denzel Mims, AJ Epinesa are the two guys that Mel Kiper thinks the Vikings will take. Let's start with Denzel Mims. He was amazing at the Super Bowl. He ran a 4.38 and is considered to be a high intelligence type of guy, great character and all that. I mean, at 22, I think if you're a Vikings fan, you have to be happy with that pick.
You do. I think some people are questioning whether that's a reach, but then again, maybe you're not looking at the way that the rest of this draft played out. Like clearly the intel that Kuiper's getting is telling him at this point there might be a first round run on receivers, and by the late 20s, the guys that you were expecting to be there in the second round probably aren't going to be there. So for Mims to jump up if from where he was at, I know weeks ago when you and I started draft scouting, he was a mid-second round pick. I think that
Yep.
in several of them, both you and I had him. Even when we were doing our mock draft at the combine, he was somewhere around that second round pick, maybe even early third. But I think he really helped himself with the combine. Obviously, he had the third fastest 40 time. This team needs speed at receiver. I mean, even if Diggs was still here, I always said that one of their top priorities this year, maybe not the top, but they had to draft some speed at receiver.
Totally.
They needed to be able to have that stretch the field option. And what I like about him, uh, I mean, he's obviously the build, the physicality, the size, the length, the ball control, the body control, excuse me, and the way that he plays the ball. Like he's set up to be a really good outside receiver, but he does have some experience playing in the slot. Now he didn't get to do a lot of it at Baylor, but that is a good thing to have because if you're trying to replace Stephon Diggs, we know it's not going to be seamless. I know that everyone has pointed out all of their first round busts from Sidney Rice to Percy Harvin to Laquan Treadwell, Cordero Patterson, the whole thing. I get it. You are risking a lot by picking a receiver at the spot, but I think you have to. I think that you have to go with the highest ceiling player and the best possible receiver that's there. And the fact that so many guys were taken ahead of them, they might not have a chance to get one of the top receivers that they liked, even down at 25, which is why I think it's smart to go offense and then defense, hit him back to back.
And I think you also said it well that this is a draft that has three guys who are clear-cut first-round picks. Yeah. And Mims is not in that range, but those guys are going to go high because everybody realizes how valuable great wide receiver play is in the NFL. So then you kind of have to reach, so to speak, to take the next best guy if he's there, because if you try to wait, then he's probably going off the board to somebody else. So, I look at the guys who have been drafted in the first round, even over the last 4 years since Stephon Diggs came into the league. And yeah, it's pretty darn hard to replace a Stephon Diggs. That's why
and it will be, though. I mean, not to interrupt, but if you take a second round wide receiver, a third round wide receiver, it's not going to be, I know that it's an easier, I'm using that in air quotes, but it's an easier position to translate to the NFL from the college game, more so than cornerback, for example. Let's say the player playing opposite the wide receiver, because a lot more of your play that you're doing at the college level can translate. Now, that doesn't mean that they're going to be able to find the guy, that we're going to be able to project out that Denzel Mims, if he is indeed this pick at 22, is going to be 1,000-yard receiver in his first year. I mean, Diggs didn't explode onto the scene in 2015 and have this breakout season. I mean, it came over time, and he's really, really good. But that development aspect, too, is something that we can't just forget and say, oh, he was amazing by the second he stepped into the NFL. That just wasn't the case. I mean, he had the potential, and he had a very high ceiling early on. But it's going to be hard to replace him. Like, people just need to come to terms with that. It's not going to be seamless, but you have to start somewhere and you have to move on and start thinking that way.
Yep, you've got to take the best shot you can. And if your hope is that you're going to find somebody else in the fifth round who will become the next Diggs, let's just rewind in the show where I tried to find successful fifth round receivers in the draft and had to get to Tony Martin. Yeah, somebody else pointed out on Twitter that Tyreek Hill was also a fifth rounder, but only because of his horrific background, and that's otherwise he would have been a first round pick considering his talent. And I don't know if anybody like that in the draft, or would I want that person taken anyway. So let's move on to 25th here, and we're going to have Seth Wickersham come on and talk about his great article about Tom Brady and Bill Belichick and their breakup in about 10 minutes here. But Epenesa, is a monster defensive tackle who there is some concerns, or I'm sorry, defensive end who there's some concerns about the athleticism. But I think if you produce in college, you could produce in the NFL a lot of the time. And working with Andre Patterson, we see these guys succeed. My only question would be, do you have to draft a defensive end here when you've been able to develop them so effectively that the Panthers just paid Stephen Weatherly, Afadi Adenabo just had 7 sacks. Both of your guys were not first-round draft picks. I don't know if you have to do this here.
So I went back and I actually ground the tape yesterday. As I was writing this thing, ground it into a fine dust.
Okay.
This is one I really wanted to study and figure out. Okay, how can you replace that same sort of power and explosion that you get from Everson Griffin, that is no longer going to be there because he's not coming back, at least we don't think, in free agency. So the athleticism thing, and I know that he had a terrible combine and all of that, that's all neither here nor there. I mean, he's got really, really strong hands, and he is a powerful pass rusher. He can, win one-on-one matchups. He plays with power, and you see that. It's clear to anybody who's watching any sort of game film of this guy from Iowa over the last 2 seasons. He is an incredibly violent and powerful pass rusher. So that's the thing that jumped out to me immediately. I didn't have to watch more than 5 minutes to figure that out. And I wonder now, like you said, if they, Everson Griffin was a 4th-round pick for obvious reasons too, that he fell to the 4th round because of some, red flag stuff. He probably would have been higher, but look at the development that he had over a 10-year career in Minnesota. Look at where Afadi Odenigbo is right now. Like, do you go with a rotation right now to figure out, what the team can do to replace all that you got opposite Danielle Hunter at defensive end? You could, but I do think that this is more of a position of need than people think. To be able to find a defensive end that is as good as Epenesa. I mean, he's considered one of the best in the draft. He just had a really bad combine, but I don't think that should hurt him as far as his NFL development. I mean, the athleticism was never the first thing about his game that you're looking at. It's the power. And, I think it's a smart pick because it's very much a pick based on free agency and the way that things have played out. But beyond him, like, I know that I'm already thinking probably too far ahead. What does that look like behind him and Danielle Hunter? I mean, what does your rotation of defensive ends look like? Because it looks like you just have Afadi Odenigbo and that's it. And that's, I'm curious. Like, do they want to spend more draft capital? Because on the interior, I think they're going to be okay. I think that, if you use Jaleel Johnson the way you did last year, if you use even Odenigbo the way that you did last year, moving him all over the place, you're in a good spot. But, at defensive end, what do you do now that you have a completely different look on your line?
Who has the quickest twitch? Whose hips are the most oily?
3 times in one show.
Who has the quickest long snap?
It was an epic
hand
breakdown.
sizes, wingspans.
Thank you.
You earned this.
No one knows hand sizes and wingspans better than Courtney, our draft scout.
Just real quick, I just wanted to read a note here because that was a great breakdown. I would go with the corner here personally.
That's one thing. I just to note. Like, I know that people are pretty skittish on the fact that they went wide receiver and defensive end and didn't address the cornerback or safety need.
Or tackle.
But I mean, look at the tackles that were available at that spot. I mean, we saw the run on them in the top 10, and outside of that, I just think that was a little tough. I would have gone cornerback in one of those spots. I really would have. But I can also understand the rationale to do it the way it was planned out.
Yeah, I think that would be the criticism I have. It's there. You almost can't miss if you pick a player because the Vikings have so many needs. The only way you could screw this up is taking a running back. I mean, even if you drafted a quarterback, it's not insane. Defensive end is a need. I think when you're looking at positional value, corner is a place to go, or tackle because they